Hi, I'm Char, woodshop teacher and board member here at Decatur Makers. Today, we are going to talk about how to use the table saw. Before coming into the woodshop, there's a couple things that you want to remember to do, and that is take care of your PPE. We need to ensure that you are safe and that you are helping to keep the rest of our members here safe. You want to make sure that you have eye protection, ear protection, and also something to cover your mouth and your nose, such as a respirator. These aren't the typical masks that we will wear in the shop, but during this given time, this is what we're going to do to make sure that we keep you safe and that I keep myself safe. Let's get started. As we move on to the features of the saw, dust collection for the table saw is located directly behind the saw. Opening and closing the blast gate on the saw stop turns on dust collection for the entire wood shop, and closing it turns it off for the entire shop. On the side of the table saw, you'll see system codes, and these codes will indicate any issues that you may be experiencing with the table saw. And we'll talk about the lights in just a second. But if you have a problem, you can check here to identify what the issue is. If you have any problems, feel free to speak with one of the captains or the makerspace manager. You can also email info@decaturmakers.org. After ensuring that the table saw is plugged in, you can flip the switch right here. The red light will blink, indicating that the machine is receiving power. Once the red light stops blinking and the green light is the only light lit up, you are now ready to use the saw. Turning this raises and lowers the blade. Once you get the blade to the desired height, you can turn this to lock it back in place. On the right side of the motor of the table saw, you can adjust the bevel angle of the blade by loosening the knob and turning it this way. And as indicated here, this will be the degree at which your bevel cut is made. On top of the table saw, you have an insert plate. This insert plate should always be installed despite what type of blade you're using. Right now, we have an opening for a single blade, and we'll talk about stacked dado blades later. Over to the right is the fence. The fence is used for ripping wood, never for cross-cutting. To adjust the fence, take this lever and make sure it's up, and you can slide it in any direction. Once you reach the desired area, you can push the lever down and give the fence a little push forward just to secure it and lock it into place. There are measurements located on the table saw to help you safely and accurately make your cuts. Underneath the table saw are several accessories that you might find useful while making various types of cuts. Some of the most commonly used accessories in the shop are push sticks, gripper, micro jig, which is like a push block, a metal detector, a miter gauge, a push block, an angle finder, and a feather board. These accessories are used to not only ensure that you're cutting safely, but to also make sure that your cuts are accurate. This is known as a dado stack. A dado stack is comprised of several different blades, chippers, and shims. And these are used for cutting rabbets, dados, and grooves in wood. And all that is a small space in the wood to accept another smaller piece. If you ever need to use a dado stack, please make sure you see one of the woodshop captains or the makerspace manager to assist you in changing the blades out. The table saw is used for making a variety of different types of cuts. It's used for making rip cuts, cross cuts, miter cuts, and bevel cuts. One of the best things that you can use this saw for is rip cutting. Rip cutting is when you cut with the grain of the wood. The patterns that you see here, that's the grain. This is actually a glued up board, and if you look closely, you can see where it's been put together. But each of these pieces was once in the center of a tree. So imagine a bunch of boards stacked together in a round formation. You can even see the growth lines right there. And it's just been sliced down, surfaced for size, or S4S, to make it easy for you to have a clean, smooth board. When you get ready to do your rip cut, after measuring your board, slide the fence over to the desired location. Two things that you want to ensure before you rip. You want to make sure that the side that's going against the fence is square. And that basically means that it's straight. There's a couple of ways that you can check to make sure that your board is square. You can use a speed square to make sure that it is actually square. If you have thicker wood, you can use the jointer, which is located behind us. And if you have any questions about squaring up your wood, you can see one of the woodshop captains. The second thing to remember to ensure that you have a perfectly square cut and board is to think about your waste being on the left side of the blade. So you have one straight side going up against the fence, and once you make your cut, you'll have another straight side. And this will be your waste. To position the blade, you want to ensure a few things. These are the teeth of the blade. And in between the teeth are what are known as the gullets. And the gullets are used to collect sawdust and, of course, to keep it out of your face. Back here we have the riving knife. This riving knife should be installed at all times, and this prevents kickback. Kickback occurs when the blade grabs your workpiece and propels it back at you at a very, very fast pace. This can be potentially dangerous, so you want to ensure that the riving knife is always installed when you're cutting. The ideal height for the blade is for it to be 3 gullets above your workpiece. The only time that you would not have this 3 gullets above your workpiece is if you were making a groove that was maybe halfway through your board. Otherwise, you don't want it to be too low. It'll go through the blade too slowly, and you definitely don't want it to be too high because you won't have total control over your board. Once you have the dust collection turned on and your blade set at the appropriate height, you're ready to switch on the saw, and you can do so by pulling this paddle up. This paddle is also used to turn the saw off. For any reason, if you can't find the paddle while you're standing, you can always use your knee in an emergency to close it. I'm standing over to the left of the blade so that I'm not in the way of any potential kickback. As I push my workpiece through the blade, I use my push block to apply pressure to the side that I'm keeping, and I make sure that I push that past the blade before stopping. Once it's past the blade and out of the way, I can then turn the saw off. This is known as a miter gauge. You can make 90-degree cuts or anywhere from 0 to 60 by turning this lever. You always need to make sure that your workpiece is supported with either a miter gauge or a crosscut sled before cutting. Never use the rip fence to cross-cut wood. And you can slide this in on either side, either here or here in these T-tracks, and position your workpiece securely against the fence on the miter gauge. And now we're ready to push it through. before you cut, you want to make sure that you're standing to the left of the blade. Now I'm right-handed, so that's why I'm standing over to the left. If you're left-handed and you feel more comfortable standing on this side, that's fine. But what you don't want to do is stand directly behind the blade. Reason being, you can experience kickback. And kickback happens when the blade grabs your piece of wood or it binds. And this can be a result of having a dull blade or wet wood or cutting really, really hard wood. And it will grab your piece of wood and hurl it back at an incredible speed. So you want to ensure that you're never standing directly behind the blade, and always check the area around you to ensure that there is no one behind you. If there is, you can wait until they're finished cutting or let them know that you're getting ready to cut, and I'm sure that they'll be happy to move for you. To make miter cuts with the miter gauge, simply untwist the knob and turn it to the desired location. In the corner of the wood shop, we have a variety of sleds and jigs to make your cuts safe and accurate, and you can do several things like make tapered legs on the table saw. For now, I'm going to use the Crosscut Sled. There's arrows on top of the sled that indicate the direction in which it should go. So these should be facing away from you. Underneath the sled, there's an insert that slides perfectly into the track on top of the table saw. You will need to raise your blade just a little bit. Still ensuring that it is approximately 3 gullets above your workpiece. If you ever need to make repetitive cuts and don't want to stop and measure each piece, you can set up what's called a stop block, and it's basically just a scrap piece of wood clipped with a quick clamp, which are located on the back wall of the shop to the fence of the crosscut sled. When using any type of blade, tear out can happen. And tear out is when the blade rips through the fibers of your wood. This can lead for a pretty unsightly edge, but there's a couple of ways that you can circumvent that. One is by having a sharp blade. The other is by putting paint tape on your cut line, and this will ensure that you have less or any tear out at all. Now we're going to move on to bevel cuts. Bevel cuts are great for plywood because they help hide those unsightly edges, and they're pretty easy to do on the table saw. First thing you want to do is make sure that you have your miter gauge set up. Then we'll raise the blade and we'll tilt it to 45 degrees. When you're making a bevel cut, you want to make sure that your blade is raised just a little bit higher than the 3 gullets above your workpiece to ensure that it goes through. So mine's is set at about 2 inches above my workpiece. After you're all done for the day, be sure to leave enough time so that you can clean up. And here are the steps that you want to take. Make sure you remove any scrap wood that you have. The larger pieces can go in the scrap wood bin located right outside the door. Smaller pieces that can't typically be reused can go into the trash can located right inside of the shop. Be sure to return all accessories to their original location. Return the blade to its original location. So I'm zeroing it back in, turning my bevel back to 90 degrees, and lower the blade back into the table. After vacuuming the table off, I'll slide the fence back over the blade and the zero clearance insert, and then I will switch this off. You can leave the saw plugged in. Sometimes the hose becomes disconnected from the table saw, leaving sawdust underneath. So be sure to check underneath when you're vacuuming and cleaning up, and vacuum any sawdust out and reattach the hose. After you vacuum the floor, the area around it, you're all set and ready for your next project.